Welcome to Synchronicity. My guest this week is Jaliessa Sipress. She is awesome. I kind of like had been aware of Jaliessa for I don't know, a couple of years, like tuned in on social media. She's amazing. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. We talk about a lot of stuff related to kind of deities, rituals, kind of her metaphysical cosmology and conception of how stuff works. We continued the conversation after the podcast. We were kind of going back and forth, exchanging some stuff I had been downloading and just kind of talking about, what we believe and what we're doing. And it seems like there's kind of a revival of ritual and magical spells and deity kind of communion going on because we realized we were both kind of getting drawn to this independently. And then when we spoke, we're like, oh shit, you're doing that too? So it's really cool. Go check her out. I'm linking to all her stuff in the show notes. She does readings. She does workshops. She's fucking awesome. So go check out what she's doing. We talk about astrology, a lot of stuff. I think you're pretty much gonna love this episode. If you want an extension of this episode, I released the bonus episode on Patreon. That is all about deities, magic, and other fun stuff. You can sign up for that at patreon.com/synchronicity. That's the $5 tier if you just want the bonus episodes and no readings or live streams and stuff like that. That's rocking. Thanks to everyone who has joined over the past, I think we grew by like 40% over the past 2 months on the Patreon. So that's pretty dope. Pretty cool shit. Nice community of people. We're also doing a Think and Grow Rich mastermind group in the Discord server. So you get access to that if you join the Patreon as well. But yeah, this episode rocks. I'm pretty stoked for you guys to hear it. I think you're going to enjoy it. Everything else, cool, good stuff. Fun times, USA. All right, without further ado, here is Jaliessa Sipress. Jaliessa, thank you for coming on. I'm glad we got to do this. A couple of scheduling things where I canceled 1-2 times. Pretty par for the course for me. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've been following work for a couple years now, so I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I have been following yours for probably around the same time. I was looking back in our Instagram messages and I was like, oh, we've been talking for like a couple of years now. I didn't realize, but I think you really came onto my screen through our mutual friend Jessa, and then I just kind of tuned in and have been not only like impressed with what you're doing, but like pleasantly surprised with all the kind of areas that seem to overlap in terms of like what I've been doing. And some of it I don't talk about too much. But one that I kind of wanted to start with, not to go too deep into the woo right in the beginning, but is mediumship. Right? Like, okay. I didn't realize that this was something that you were doing. I also kind of got dragged into this in a very weird way, and I heard you talking about it in an interview, which really like I can relate to. I was doing a bunch of astrology readings, right? A bunch of tarot readings, and all of a sudden people's like dead relatives would like kind of pop in, and like it's a very weird thing. People didn't sign up to talk about this stuff. You probably know this as someone who has this as an ability or whatever we would want to call it. It feels kind of like good but weird, and you don't know kind of where that like social contract like begins and ends, and like what people actually want from that, and whether they want to hear about their dead grandma coming in from Mexico. Like this happened to me like a few years ago, and I was just like, what the fuck is going on? Tell me a little bit how you kind of discovered this. I mean, like, how does this fit into like your regular life? Is it something you allow in? Is it something you kind of like maybe I'll keep that on the side for a little bit? But I'd love to hear more about this because I don't know too many people who actually talk and do this stuff.
Yeah, I try not to. I try not to talk about it publicly because it's a lot of pressure, and I don't really understand the mechanism quite yet, like fully in a way that feels like I can control it. So I'm at the point now where I'm like in an Uber to Barnes and Noble, and it's like, oh, your great aunt is like sitting next to me. Um, and the way that it started, I mean, I definitely feel like as a kid, I would just say stuff that the whole family would look at me and be like, "What? How does she know that?" Or like, what are you talking about?" Or stuff like that. And then yeah, when I started doing readings publicly, I started doing a lot of like actual in-person events, so like festivals and stuff like that. I would be a reader, and I was doing astrology, oracle, tarot kind of combination sessions, and I would get this weird feeling. I would get like this feeling like a bunch of energy, and then it almost felt like the skeleton or the skull of another being would start rattling inside of me. And it was really distracting, and it was just a lot of energy. And I didn't know what it was, so I would just be like, oh, I'm excited. Like, I don't know what's going on. And so I didn't really do anything about it, and then I would just like fully kind of tap out after these a full day of that kind of work and not knowing what's happening to you, and you're kind of like trying to not be distracted by it and read cards or astrology or whatever. And for me, astrology is a portal. Like, I am an astrologer because it's a portal to basically someone's consent for me to do what I do, but it's not like I'm just reading stuff. So yeah, it started out that way, the same as you, doing astrology readings and that being a portal to what I do, but then started to have people's relatives coming in. And then eventually I kind of like just, at first was like in-person readings, and then it went all the way down to like just the phone. Like, I can't even see you. I don't even want to look at you, because if I look at you, someone's going to come in. So I just started creating so many boundaries to the point that, so that people wouldn't come through, and it still would happen. So over the past couple of years, I've tried to cultivate it a little bit more. I got really obsessed with like platform mediums and people who people consider charlatans. Like, I really love that world. I think it's so fascinating. Not interested in doing it right now, or maybe never, but yeah, so it just kind of happened to me, I would sort of say, and then I've developed more of a relationship to it over the past couple of years, just from seeing, really public mediums and their stories and being like, oh my God, that's exactly how it feels for me. And because they would describe a lot of ways that they would experience it, that I would use, that I would be like, oh, well, it's just this. So it probably isn't, what people are using who are doing this full time and are really clear about it. And then I'm like, no, it's the exact same thing that they're feeling. They're just more trusting of themselves, and they've built more of like kind of a library of like symbols, like, oh, when you get a chill, it means this, like that kind of stuff. So I haven't fully created my library of sensations and all those kinds of things. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with it, is just wanting to develop it more, and feel more confident in my real experience with it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I relate. It's one of those things where like, initially I wouldn't even say reluctant. I would say like resistant to dealing with it, because it's such a foreign. I would get a lot of body stuff, like, sensations and pains in different places of my body, and then like eventually, depending on where you are in your life and how receptive you are to it, you kind of acknowledge that maybe there's something else going on and trying to communicate, and like the way kind of information or voices are happening in your head feels so distinctly different from how you think, that you're like, okay, well, this is clearly something else. And then if messages start coming through and like things they're trying to tell you to communicate, and it's like, it's interesting though, because like, it seems like a lot of the metaphysical and like reading work does kind of open a portal for people who do this. And I think I made an early I don't even want to call it a mistake, but like I was doing this imaginal exercise where I'd create like this light portal and just welcome in all energy. And I'm like, why the fuck did I do that? Like, what did I think was going to happen when you open up to all energy? You like, it's like you're putting out like a porch light for like metaphysical insects to come and just like flood in. And so like, I very much relate to like trying to get a handle on it, because I think I'm sensing like you see that there is a lot of power and kind of like value in that type of mediumship. I also, like the platform mediums, even if like they kind of seem like a little bit like charlatans, and they're just, but like for people who've experienced it, know that no one really would choose this. It's not like someone looks at the surveys, the realm of careers, and it's like, I'd like to talk to dead people. Like, that seems
Right.
like a fun and interesting thing to do. Like, it's just not something people are picking, but it happens. And I kind of feel like I'm in the same place with you. Like, I don't make it I don't offer it as like readings. I don't say like, hey, I'm a medium, come and speak to me. And sometimes even if I'm getting pinged, I won't even bring it up. But if it's strong enough and like something is really trying to come through, I do think there's a lot of value there, because it's a misunderstood aspect of, I think, our relationship to spirit worlds. Like, we are so usually immersed in our world that like we can just forget about that. A lot of people just don't even acknowledge it. And that's kind of what I wanted to ask. Like, so I know you're an astrologer, you're an artist, you're a writer, but like, I think one of my favorite things about you is you have a way of not taking this stuff too seriously, but yet giving it the importance that it deserves, right? Does that make sense? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, where has that always just been kind of your vibe? Like, it sounds like you've been experiencing a lot of these things from a very young age. Did it take you a while to kind of develop the mindset to not take this stuff so seriously or make it a big deal? Or you're just like, I was always like that. I never really took it seriously. I recognize it's important, but it's not something that I want to make a big deal.
Yeah, the divine jokester, trickster energy is very alive in, like, he's the first energy you have to go through in the world of like the Yoruba pantheon, and that was like my first entry into magic was through African traditional spirituality, ATR. And so I definitely feel like that was like my first realization that like the path into the rest of the very serious gods with the very serious things to do is through the one that's like, give me candy, now throw me some coins, now do a little jig and turn around, and then he poofs and he's gone. You know, it's like that whole energy is like it's a very important entrance into the spiritual world. But I took myself way too seriously for way too long. I started out in social justice spaces, and I started doing social justice work when I was 13,
Yeah.
and got really heavily, like very, very deep into it, and just took the world very seriously. I took everything very seriously. Felt very like angry at the world and very much like it's everyone else's problem, and was very obsessed with my marginalized identities, and came out of that during COVID because of my experience of that community's relationship to that thing. And I feel like I've always been very silly, just as a person. My mom would definitely say so. Especially as a kid, I would do these like weird interpretive dances to like opera for the whole family, and fashion shows and all these things. But I think really because I was spiritual through my time in the social justice world. I mean, obviously, you're supposed to start out atheist, like no gods, no masters. But then I slowly reintroduced it through African traditional religion because it was like okay, because I was black, and it was like, oh, this is okay, like I can embrace this, and ended up in a house of all witches in that particular pantheon. So this is very non-linear, but I guess it's to say that it's always been something I've been afraid to take too seriously because I know its power. And then also recognizing that whenever you do take it too seriously, it's going to turn in on itself and become a big clown. And so I think that the combination of taking myself way too seriously as a social justice warrior type for so many years, and then kind of coming out of that and realizing that it didn't help anything, like it didn't actually move the needle on most of the things that I was really passionate about, and I'm still passionate about, but approach in different ways, and seeing how much liberation I've actually experienced through non-duality, and through that seeing everything as a joke, and kind of the divine existence of being human as a joke in itself, I think has really been it's been the key for me. So yeah, I definitely think it's been a thread through my entire life, but really being able to have it mirrored in my spiritual practice has definitely been a journey that's kind of been cultivated, I would say, over the last 5 years.
That makes sense. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned activism because I think this is like a big, I don't even call it a stumbling block for a lot of people, but like when you start kind of walking the metaphysical, non-dual, spiritual, whatever we want to call it, the woo path, you do bump up against kind of activism in a lot of ways because you become more sensitive to everything, right? And when we think of like, more awareness, heightened consciousness, we're usually thinking of like, oh, love and light. It's going to be amazing. All of the amazing stuff is going to be coming in, but you actually become more sensitive to everything. And we live in a dualistic world, and a lot of that stuff shows up. And then you are confronted like, what do I do? Like, there's suffering here, there's suffering there. Like, what do I do? And I think a lot of people rush towards trying to solve those problems. And I think a lot of people then learn the lessons of like, listen, if I'm carrying around all of this stuff inside of me and I rush towards an activist mindset, I'm just bringing that shit with me. Like, is that actually going to be something that is going to affect any real change? Or am I just kind of adding to the chaos that exists? And I see a lot of people struggling with this. And I think I probably have the opposite issue when it comes to struggling. I can get like a little too not attached. I'm just like, listen guys, like you're gonna get sucked into it, you might as well just not. And it's not that I don't pay attention. I purposely try to like pay attention to what's going on in the world, but I know how easy it is to get sucked into kind of like one of those sides, if you will, like when you're doing activism, and it can really pull you away from like a sense of inner peace. So it's interesting to hear you say that that was kind of like a journey you've gone through. Was it something specifically about like the pandemic times that kind of like popped you out of it, or was it just like, this is time to like chill?
Yeah, it was the lack of congruence between like we don't trust the government and then completely following everything the government says and does all of a sudden. It felt very like, wait, what? Like, I've spent years talking about very illegal shit with you, and all of a sudden you're like, well, you must wear the I was just like, wait, and I don't have an issue. I think that there are people whose dharmic path is to be an activist, to shine light on dark areas of the government structures. I'm definitely not pro-government. I'm definitely not interested in people being taken advantage of. But at the same time, it's not my path in that way. And I think that my biggest issue is people saying that everyone should XYZ to anything. So activism has to be a part of that for me. And I think that the biggest trap is the moral trap, and is the trap of duality, because this is a dual dimension, 100%. It's a polarity dimension, but nothing is actually dual in reality or in any other dimension of space and time, or outside of space and time. So my experience was I was in Portland, so I was where everything was burning, and I was at the protest. Like I'm not going to say too much about where I was, but I was there, you know what I mean? Like that was my world, and those were my people. I grew up in Portland. So, and I was really disappointed at what I was seeing, from people that I had been organizing with for, I don't know, 6 years at that point.
Yeah.
And so that, on top of like watching the news and being like, I don't know, I think maybe we should accept that. I'm not going to say too many things, but I feel like accepting people die, accepting that, certain things are occurring and the way that they're occurring, and not having these kinds of mandates about where bodies should be and how bodies should move and how bodies should approach their experience of what's occurring. And I was, a week into like lockdown, because I was actually in Greece at the time that we started going to lockdown, and had to like emergency fly back. So it was very heightened for me because of my experience of being abroad and having to come home immediately, and being in Portland, where I'm from, around family also was just very, very heightened. So it was kind of like, wait, I'm here, and this is the social rupture we're always talking about. This break, and what we're doing with it is not what I feel like I'm aligned with. So not to say that it isn't the best thing to do. I think for some people it is, but it is just isn't for me.
No, and I think that's like that's the core message that everyone can take away from it is like what feels right for you. Like no one is saying don't be an activist. No one is saying don't, be drawn to the horrors of the world and want to shed some light there. Like we need people to do that actually. There's a balancing game with the dual world that we need kind of the balancing of energies. It's just at a certain point if you notice it's pulling you off track, it's like what are do we really want to keep doing this? And it's funny. You're like, I don't want to say too much about this. I have the problem of usually saying too much about these things. And I was shocked personally. I run a relatively spiritual woo-y podcast, and I was like, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I didn't get vaccinated. I openly spoke about that. I wasn't condemning people in my family have been like, I didn't have a strong stance on it. I was like, do what you feel is right. And man, like just some of the feedback, and I was just like, holy shit, like how are we this upset over this right now? Like I don't understand where this is actually coming from. And it was like this weird kind of like bowing to authority that I just didn't expect in a lot of ways coming from this type of realm. But it teaches you the lesson that like there's nothing that's immune from that. Like there's no like special place where that won't happen. So yeah, it was a really interesting kind of experience. But I mean, I think like those things usually, and it seems like you came away with this too, it does kind of teach you the unseriousness of everything. Like if you get too locked into a perspective, it will usually be upended. And that's why, like you were saying, like the gateway to a lot of this stuff is that trickster kind of jokester energy. And like when things are really difficult and hard, the more you can kind of remember that it is kind of a joke or a game or a trick, it has a way of loosening kind of the shackles that are weighing you down. I know when I'm feeling the worst, like when I'm bordering on depression or actually depressed, I'm taking things very seriously. Like nothing is a joke. There's no fun. There's no games. It's just this very serious thing that's going on out there, and I have to deal with it, and I have to figure it out or put in the hard work to do it. And it's like you look back on your life, and like I can't find many examples where that type of like response or energy actually solved anything. It's not like that was the thing that helped it. That wasn't the thing that made it better. So yeah, I mean, so I heard you say something, not to shift too abruptly, but I liked this kind of interpretation of how you were talking about astrology, because these are tools that I use and a lot of us just kind of resonate with, where you described it kind of like doing math, which I really like. That resonated on like like some people may take that the wrong way, but it is kind of like, it gives you a structure for kind of looking at energy that I think does become like I used to love to do math books when I was a kid, like, like do addition books and stuff. It does kind of feel like that and gives you kind of a portal into it. So can you talk a little bit about like how astrology fits into like what you're doing out there in the world and how you use it personally for your life?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's something similarly satisfying to astrology as there is like doing a math problem. I don't like necessarily consider myself a math person, but I also am like, I can appreciate a nice angle, and I can appreciate that 2 plus 2 equaling 4 is very satisfying. And I think that there's something about astrology, like for me looking at someone's chart, where I just go, like when I look at a chart, it just, everything makes sense. Everything clicks into place. It's kind of like in the movies where they're doing the safe, and they're like trying to find the click, and then, or like opening a safe in general, like there's a certain combination or a code, and then that code opens the treasure, the magic, or the money, or whatever else is inside. And I don't really understand my relationship to astrology. It's the only thing I've kept my promise to over this many years. It's been almost 10 years for me. And I don't really know why I wouldn't prefer it. Like if you showed me the systems, I wouldn't be like that one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I find that its place in pop culture can be also very distracting and difficult. But there's something about the language and the mythology that for me, it's just like everything goes back to astrology. Everything is about how in my opinion, it's like the 12 signs are just these different archetypes that exist in every single human, and then the planets, the players, how many energies you have that are operating from within that archetype, and then how those archetypes are having conversations from within you that can then express how you're going to approach various experiences in life, and what you're going to be very good at and what's going to be very challenging for you. So there's all of that there. And then there is also the fact that it is a portal into me just kind of channeling whatever information they're meant to hear at that time. And being able to use the chart for context, which I think is really helpful in grounding. I think that's what's most difficult about mediumship is I'm like, a shark, a bear, and then a tooth, and then your grandma, and a shoe, and they're like, okay. And then there's like half of a name that comes in, right? And it's just like you said, so much information. And astrology is kind of, the system is created for you, whereas with mediumship you have to be like, all right, an apple means this, you have to create your own system, which takes a little bit more time, and I'm a little too ADHD for that. So astrology is very neat. It's a neat way of kind of putting everything into categories, and then whenever you but then when you unpack the category, it's like it could go on forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And I'm trained in a couple of different types of astrology, but you could study it for 17 lifetimes and you still wouldn't there's no bottom, But astrology also does this thing where the more you learn, the more it then folds back in on itself. It's like, oh, I could look at the eighth decan of the night, but then it also could have said that just because you have a Libra moon, So I just love what it does. I love its structure, and I love its dance, and I love the way that story folds into it. And so it's my primary way of connecting people with whatever information they need at that time. It's also my way of picking dates, or kind of, I guess, doing divinatory magic of when is the best time for something. I'm also trained in medical astrology, but I don't use it because it's, again, too technical. But it's definitely my lens for the world. That and non-dual tantra are my two kind of lenses through which I see the world.
Oh, I didn't know non-dual tantra. That's cool. I dabbled that back in my college years. I got kind of sucked into that realm as well. Non-dual. How about that? Something that something that occurs to me, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot recently, is the roles of deities and godheads, and how they fit into not only our personal conceptions of ourselves and the world and our own power, but how they really are these beings. They really are these kind of energies that exist. And I struggle sometimes with saying how independent they are from us. I don't think they're truly independent, but they clearly exist if we believe they do, and how powerful they can be in our lives, at various points, whether it's Hindu deities, Norse, Greek. I do a lot of archetypal astrology too, so the planets all represent deities, and the relationships between them and their placements all go into a lot of what I'm looking at in a chart. And I noticed this is, you even mentioned with the ATR stuff, this seems to be a pretty big part of what you do in this realm. How do you conceive of where deities fit in, right? What are these entities who you view as out there, interfacing with you, or is it your willingness to interface with them that allow them to kind of influence your life? How does that fit in for you?
Yeah. That's a really interesting question.
Right.
Yeah, so the Yoruba pantheon of deities, so this comes from Nigeria. The Yoruba people of Nigeria. They were my first entrance into deities. I actually grew up with fairies. So I grew up I grew up Christian, but my grandma was also we're also gonna give offerings to fairies and sing to them and talk to them over the bonfire and stuff. So I thought that was very normal. And so interactions with kind of other beings was something that was alive in my childhood and in my early life. And I think that kind of softened my experience of entering into what I would say is my continuous relationship with different energies now. But yeah, the strongest kind of entrance into deity relationship was through African traditional religion. And those are very, very strong energies, and they're just as serious and kind of extreme as they are playful, and very unserious. And so it's very intense to, like, I would never say I can like work with a, it's like you either become them and you let them ride you. Literally, it's called mounting, which is another word for possession, or you like ask them to do it for you, like, so I think that each different pantheon has different energy to it, and there's different ways to work with them based on what they do, like, elementals, gnomes, fairy beings, those kinds of things, they're earthly, so they're much more practical. They can help you with much more practical things. And then recently I've been connecting more with my Nordic heritage. I'm half Norwegian, basically. And so I've been exploring a lot of Odin's kind of connection to the humanity in general. And when I realized that he's just like our dad, like, actually,
Yeah.
he's just like
The All Father.
dad.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that he
Yeah.
has parents. Like, the only reason he's seen as a deity is because he created human beings from wood. Like, he carved us, basically. He gave us life. So I'm like, why would I worship my dad? Like, I would ask my dad questions. I'd want to know his perspective, because I literally don't have a relationship with my dad, so I also don't just understand fathers. But so maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that you don't worship your dad. I'm pretty sure you just are like, oh, you have wisdom and experience that I don't have, and you also might have a certain kind of love or compassion for my experience. So why don't I kind of court the kind of relationship that would help me, and whatever you need in return, whether that's just the fact that I'm asking, or offerings, or whatever that might be. So I think that I approach each pantheon different based on like the land that they are kind of attached to on Earth. I think that says a lot about their their reach here. Like, the ice is so powerful, and I'm really connected to that right now. I think we've put a lot of spells into ice, and as those things are melting, a lot of those like, I just think that there's a lot of different land aspects to deities, and why there are different deities in every single place, even though they all have deities that represent the same thing, right? Like, Freya and Lakshmi have similarities of like, oh, beauty and abundance and fertility and love, but they're two different physicalities, because also, like, the way that God created us in his image, we also create gods in our image. And so this sense of like kinship with that. And then also in tantra, like, you become the deity also. There's a similarity there to me with ATR, where it's like these deities are so powerful that either you can just be swallowed by their energy, you can become them, or you can court them, but there isn't as much a relationship in a way that there might be with other beings. So I don't know if that answered your question at all, but
It
yeah.
did. No, it's amazing. This is basically where, like, we go through themes with our like paths and stuff, and this is like the theme that has been coming up for me a lot, because like when I found Neville Goddard stuff, right? Like, there's this strong conception and belief that your imagination is God, right? That
Yeah.
consciousness, that sense of I am, that's it. Anything outside of that is a secondary cause and should be essentially ignored, which rings true for the most part for me, just because that's how we perceive our consciousness. But I've always been attracted to deities. I've worked with deities. I've worked with a lot of things that are outside of me. And so the way I kind of interpreted it is that once we become aware of something, we have a choice of how much kind of inherent power and belief we want to put into it. And if you do put in belief into a pantheon of deities, they're real. It's not like they're not real and like, oh, they're the make-believe thing that doesn't exist. They exist. And so being clear about kind of how much belief we put in things and how much we want to work with them is just kind of what I've been playing around with recently. So it makes a lot of sense when you're talking about like, even with the African deities, like, this is what Jung would probably describe as like an archetype, like dominating the psyche, right? It comes out, it is running you. You are not in control anymore. Whatever you think your conscious mind is going to grasp and use with it, it's not. That archetypal energy is going to play out, and you will probably feel a little bit crazy while that's happening. But it is kind of like a thing that happens. And if we disregard it and don't acknowledge it and just want to say, oh, well, that's mental illness or there's something else going on, I think it's like a disservice to the energy that actually is existing there. And so, yeah, it makes a ton of sense what you're telling me in terms of like even the land stuff, right? Of course, like why wouldn't the specific geography and places and elementals and the things that we're looking at have a direct relationship and impact on these deities and how we interact with them? Because, I think some people tend to get disillusioned when like they hear their consciousness is God and that kind of concept. Like it strips away like an element of play or like duality that I think a lot of people need. Like we can play the unity consciousness game all day long, but like we're in duality. Like we can't disregard that fact and pretend that it doesn't exist. So how to play within that realm and use deities as like functional energies like is what I've really been kind of investigating and getting interested in, just because I think there's a lot to be said like coming up in the world like around those energies. And well, I do think we have an immense amount, if not ultimate control over our own individual realities. It doesn't mean we throw the baby out with the bathwater and we say, oh, well, this stuff doesn't exist. We're just playing games. It's childish games, like time to get real. Our consciousness is the only thing. That also doesn't feel accurate for me. And so like I've just been exploring and asking people like, what's the relationship with deities for you? So you answered it in a great way, which leads me to my next question. Like, this is a vague one, so forgive me on this one. Like, what do you think is like kind of going, like what themes do you think are showing up right now for you individually, of course, but also collectively? Like it's clearly a transitional period. Like no one really has any kind of clue what is materializing, but what's your intuitive sense that like we're going through as a collective right now?
Yeah, that is a big question. Also, can you hear the dog barking?
Is what?
Can you hear the dog barking?
Your dog?
You don't hear a dog.
What you probably hear is my 2.5-year-old upstairs yelling.
No. There's a dog out here, and I just don't. I want to make sure that it's.
I don't
not...
hear it.
Oh,
no,
great.
No.
Okay,
Also, this cuts out all background noise. So if you don't hear my
perfect.
2.5-year-old, I don't hear your dog. So we're good. Yeah, we're totally good.
Cool. I just wanted to make sure because sometimes you're looking at me, it's like he hears the dog. It's all over.
No. I
don't. She's just like on something right now. Anyway, okay. How I feel about what I perceive to be happening collectively is a reckoning. I think I called it I did like a year ahead event. I do them every year. I have done them every year for some time now, and I called it the split. Just because I think it's time to make a decision. I think a lot of people have been teetering with spiritual, like we're God, but like sometimes, but then like when something bad happens, like, but what about that? It's like this picky, choosy kind of energy. I think that's done. And I think it's going to get very, very difficult if you're sitting on the fence. I think the fence is getting electrocuted and you got to do something. And so I think that we're going to keep seeing things in the public consciousness that create more little splits that seem like that are going to be on the line of morality, the play of duality, of pick a side, be on the right side of history, do the right thing. This whole play of rightness, which I don't believe in.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is that what we're seeing is very obvious. And the side versus side is very obvious. And I think what you choose to do about it, that choice part, I think is what we're really coming up against for the next 3 years is, can you, first of all, recognize that you are making a choice? Second of all, recognize that it's a choice at all. And third of all, recognize that it's a choice among infinite choices and that there is no wrong one. So that kind of like those different like refinements and layers of actually recognizing the power of your consciousness and reality being here for you as a mechanism to explore yourself and to explore what's possible. Um, I think on a personal level, you know, I went to art school, and my mom was an artist. My grandma's an artist. You know, I come from a lot of art in my family, so I'm making more art than I have since going to art school and dropping out
Yeah.
twice. I am also really working with the idea of deities, and you know, I really took the whole manifestation and me being the creator of my own reality into a space where I felt that magic and spell work and all that stuff was just like, you know, you're just mimicking this thing that you could just become the thing. You could just become the magnet. You don't have to like do a little spell and then like get the thing, and then you don't have to worry about who you are. That's how I felt before. And now I'm kind of returning to it in a way that's like, how did like I have a list of 30 ancestors that go back to the 1700s in Norway that I'm like reading their names and like interacting with them. I've bought like I've bought like wood wands, and I'm like connecting to a tree in my neighborhood, and I'm like talking to Odin, and I'm like,
I love it.
you know, and I'm also really fascinated with the malefic. I'm really interested in dark magic. I'm really fascinated with dark magicians and the other side, the left-hand path, the path that I will never walk this lifetime.
Yeah.
You know, the other side of duality, really not inviting that in, but inviting it to the table, you know. On the darkest night of the year this year, I did this ritual where I like blindfolded myself, and just like I was like, anyone can come to this table. And just like put on this like really like dark music, and I was just like, you know, because I wanted to play with fear and I wanted to play with darkness, and I wanted to see like, where is the real line for me. So
Yeah.
I think my experience, I mean, I identify as a wizard, so I just am in my hovel kind of like, what's, you know, like looking through my books and highlighting pages and doing, you know, kind of doing spell work at this point. Again, you know, returning to it in a real way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I'm at personally.
It's very interesting because over the past 2-3 weeks, one of my favorite peer-to-peer programs of all time, back predating Napster, is something called SoulSeek. It's just an amazing tool. It's still around for people who want to get it. You just download it and you can search for whatever you want. And over the past 3 weeks, I started looking up like a lot of black magic stuff too, like spells, rituals, chaos magic. It's something I've tangentially experienced, you know, a few sigil magic things here and there, but I got the call. I'm just like, I don't know why I'm interested in it. And again, it's interesting you say like, I don't think I'll be practicing black magic, so to speak. Like, I don't want to get deep into like Crowley and do all these like, you know, rose cross rituals and all this, but it's there and it's interesting and it's calling. And I think having an awareness of it feeds some type of like whatever energy. Like a lot of times I feel like, I don't know if you feel like this too, like that I'm meant to process things like for myself and just like energetically larger. And like, that's why like sometimes it feels like you have precognition of what's coming, or you go through some experience before everyone else has gone through it, and then everyone else is going through it. But like, it does feel like there is this kind of return to ritualized, more kind of like spell-based magic that it's hard to explain, especially having kind of lopped that off for however many years like it's been for me, that it is kind of coming back in full force. And I think, you know, for anyone listening who also is feeling that, explore it at the very least. You don't have to invite in, you know, dark beings to control your life, but it's there. You're not going to be served by ignoring it. So it's really interesting to hear you say that this is kind of something that's been flowing into you too, because I didn't even know how to process this stuff most of the time, because I'm like, I don't even know if I believe in it so much, but I kind of feel like I do, so I can't pretend that I don't. So like, I'm gonna explore it. It's like, it's fascinating that that's kind of it's in the ether, so to speak, I guess.
Yeah.
So I
go ahead.
guess, yeah, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I was just gonna say Crowley is such an interesting one. Him and Dali, I'm really interested in right now. I mean, Crowley, not so much, but just his story. Like I watched like a very basic, because I've heard his name so many times. I've never read his work. I've never done the deep dive, but it's like he's one of those figures that we just discount because he was like bad, and you're like, okay, well, can we talk about the contextual nature of his experience, how he grew up, and also the fact that all the information that we have about him that isn't from him is usually from Christianized media or media that doesn't have any understanding and may call you, the person who's saying, oh, he's a bad person, the same thing that they call him. So can we just
Totally.
at least accept that he had a contribution, and he had such a contribution that both you and I know his name, and that most people listening are going to know who he is. That's important. And I think, with cancel culture and all these things, it's like it's okay to acknowledge that people have had a really important contribution and to look at the research and the work that they've done. A lot of the a lot of the modern medical tools that people use came through torture, through the concentration camps, through slavery. So it's like you didn't throw all that away because it came from pain and suffering. So can we apply that in other areas? Is it okay? Are we ready to do that yet? But yeah, I definitely think ceremonial magic, ritual, I think all of those things they're making a comeback.
They are, right? It's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. Like it's very like accessories, it's just all the little accessories. It's the capes and the wands and the, the herbs and there's just I have so much shit, It's like before this it was like, well, I'm the vessel and everything's all clean,
Exactly.
and then all of a sudden it's like this occultist fucking dusty lair, but that's okay. I do love aesthetics.
It's cool. I do too. And like there's a reason that like, I've liked crystals and gemstones and all this. Like there is, again, like we're in a physical world. I understand many of us want to transcend that and have these moments of like clear awareness where we recognize we're a spiritual being having a physical existence, but we are still having a physical existence. So it's like honor that as best you can and like enjoy it. Again, like anything that strikes your fancy and that you get genuinely excited or curious about, to me, is fair game. Like it really
Right.
doesn't matter what contextual relevance it has culturally or otherwise. And I think a lot of it is kind of like getting out of that and getting kind of familiar with this and that energy, right? Like not saying it has to be. And this goes back to what you were even saying about like the activism stuff and kind of like how to parse that. It's like you don't fall on one side of this and stay on that side for the rest of your existence. Like it's just not how things work in energy. Like it's not, it transmutes, it turns, it alchemizes into something else. So like to treat our own belief structure like that also feels like doing it an injustice and a disservice. And I think it's going to be really fun too. Like there is a lot
Right.
of value. Like these things have lasted and been passed down for so long. Like that's not an accident. It's not just like because there's these big control mechanisms saying you must care about spell work and God. It's like no, it's like these things
Yeah.
that resonate with us internally. So it's like why don't we acknowledge that and really do something with it if you're called to it. If you're not, then leave it. You don't have to do it. It's all good.
Yeah. Yeah, people it's actually in spite of the fact that we're constantly being told that we're silly and stupid and delusional and all these other things. So it's like, oh, you're doing what that parenting thing of like, if you try and push it away too much, people are going to be interested. And then there's so much magic there. Yeah. And also I'm so fascinated by the person who wants to save other people from their delusions, right? Like, whether it's an atheist with a Christian or a Christian with the New Age is what they call it, I think. Yeah, that kind of like savior martyr thing is kind of what I'm talking about with this split. Like this victim perpetrator, like that whole dynamic. It's quite boring. And it's quite dangerous.
It is. It's just I think I don't even want to say naturally. It's a tendency that has been developed like habitually over, I think, and throughout culture because it's a way of navigating in the same way if we look at the ego, where I am not an ego basher. The ego is functional. It has a
Right.
use. It's not something that we try to eliminate, but if we let it run the entire show all of the time, it's going to do some fucked up shit. Like it is not going to take into the holistic experience, but that's kind of like how we tend to navigate like energy and taking sides or forming opinions, and it is kind of a constant dance to like pull ourselves back and recognize the broader picture of what can be going on for no other reason than like it's more interesting like that. It's more fun. It feels more authentic. It doesn't feel like we're getting kind of like sucked into a way of being. I think a lot of us who kind of feel like this have a natural anti-authoritarian complex, and so like anytime it's like you got to do this, we're like, no, fuck that, I'm not gonna do that. And
Yeah.
that's kind of why we like don't like to be boxed into these things, but that is a very like important energy in the world. And I think if you look out when you're looking out into the world and you see kind of what happens when things get homogenized or like just like everyone gets boxed into being on one side or the other, it's usually not like great results. It's not like everyone's, oh, this is great, this is, everyone's happy now, this has really worked out for us. Like people freak out and they're like, why is this happening? And so yeah, it's just it's a fascinating time. I mean, I don't know if it's a Chinese, I believe that it's a curse that may you live in interesting times, but there's certainly, in my purview, has not been any more interesting times than where we're living now. I mean, like, it is wild out there. Like, it is absolutely wild. So, being able to navigate it with like-minded people, I think, is part of the fun of what we're doing here. Think do you have, were you going to say something?
No, I just, yeah, I think the idea of things being more interesting than they ever have been is so fascinating to me. And I think that also is like people were doing magic when they like didn't have light in their homes, so the fact that that's carried through when I could be distracting, when like Instagram's not enough and I'm like, I need to go like talk to Odin or something. It's like, wow, okay, there is something very, is the word primordial, about our relationship with the gods and with like these powers. I feel it just seems there is something innate there. Um, yeah, and the community around it is becoming more and more interesting. The more and more sort of divided and intricate the conversations become.
Yeah, no, I'm enjoying it at the very least. I don't know if everyone else is, but I'm having a good time. And I just
Yeah.
like I get tuned in to a lot of cool people continuously by staying whatever connected to this stuff. I don't know how I do it. I just naturally gravitate towards this stuff. So I'm bringing back a feature that I used to do back when I was doing a lot of guest interviews, and I'm starting to do them again, where I have 3 questions at the end. What's your favorite color?
Green is what came to mind, so I'll go with that.
Nice. Yeah, and whatever's at the top of the head. What's
Yeah.
your favorite number?
Uh, Both 3 and 7 came to mind, although I wouldn't say those, but I would say 11. But
Cool.
yeah.
And favorite animal?
Ooh. I have to go with my OG, the hummingbird. There's
Cool.
something, yeah,
I
there's
love it.
something about the hummingbird and the way they can move, and yeah.
I saved the hard hitting questions for last, obviously.
Yeah.
And then
Really?
the last question. Yeah, right. I know. The last question is practical tip. Could be anything, mundane or super woo, that has helped you in your life that you could share with other people.
Oh, wow. Oh, okay. What's coming is pay attention to cycles. Like, just noticing, oh, this is happening again. Whether it's in your own life, right? I'm hungry again. That's a cycle. Or, oh, again, the news is doing this thing. That's a cycle. The seasons, like just paying attention to cycles. I think if you want to be anything in the world at all ever. I think cycles will always help you to structure that thing, especially if you're kind of the magical sort. Cycles are your best friend when it comes to knowing the right moment to drop the ball or shoot the arrow or whatever it is. So I would say that.
Totally. And when to not freak out, because so much of my like consternation in life is when I'm pushing when I should be pulling, or when I'm going and I should be stopping, or vice versa. And being aware of what your natural rhythms and cycles are related to other things too can be very good. You're the best. I'm hoping to get down there and see you guys in the not too distant future. I didn't realize you were so close to Jessa. That's amazing. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been I was so curious to see what it would be like for us to be in conversation. So I'm glad we're like, it's so cool that, and it always happens this way, that we're kind of mirroring some aspects of our practice that both of us are maybe like, am I really doing this? Like, am I really on my sixth YouTube video about black magicians today?
Totally.
So
No, it's fascinating, and I love it because like when you're doing it like by yourself, like you do have this like, you're like, what am I doing? Like, why am I doing this? And then you hear someone else doing it and you're like, oh, thank God
Yeah.
this is actually in the ether and I'm not just like losing my fucking mind again. Amazing.
Right.
So yeah, this has been amazing. We should do it again soon. This has been really, really fun.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks so much, Noah.
Okay. Thanks for listening to that episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm assuming if you're hearing this at the end, you at least didn't hate it, unless you fell asleep, which is always a possibility. Go check out Jaliessa at her website, jaliessasipress.com. The links are in the show notes and everywhere else you would want to find them. You can check out what I have going on the Patreon, patreon.com/synchronicity, and you can also go check out any current readings and energy work I'm doing at Sync Podcast. That's SYNC, podcast.com/energy. Cool. We're good? We're good. I will see you next week. Bye-bye.